What's up, everybody? It's your man White Wolf, and welcome back to another exciting training session. Today, we're going to be going over mental development, covering the 5 hindrances from the Shaolin and Buddhist philosophy. Before we begin, I suggest to everybody to go check out Shifu Shi Yi's TED Talk on the 5 hindrances. It is certainly worth the watch. And so, let's get started. So, with today's teaching, we're going to be given it through storytelling. Stories are one of the most powerful tools that we have. It is one of the easiest ways for us to learn and retain information. And so, that being said, once upon a time, there were two good friends. Our protagonist, Joe, and his best friend, Danny. Joe and Danny grew very close through their elementary, middle school, and high school years. However, once they became adults, they both chose to go in their own separate directions. Joe choosing to go through the military, Danny choosing to go to college. A common element that always kept these two close was the feeling of unworthiness from their childhoods. Never feeling good enough, never feeling like they were appreciated or seen, trying to always people please. And funny enough, this common trait helped them find companionship in each other. As time moved forward, and they both started to gain their own experiences, they started to see their own journeys. They had many ups and downs. But soon enough, they found themselves together once again at the age of 27 back in their hometown. At this point, Joe and Danny both felt that their worlds were upside down. They felt like something was missing, that they hadn't quite reached or touched what was meant for them. So, together, they decide to take on the journey of self-development and self-mastery. Not knowing where to begin first, Joe and Danny found themselves scrolling across YouTube, wondering which audiobook to listen to first, which great speaker to hear to give a lecture, which wise monk to listen to for wisdom. And before they knew it, they happened to come across a very special yogi teacher. And something about this video just called to them. And so they decided to click it. And through hearing the wisdom of this yogi master, they started hearing new things, started hearing words like chakra, mindfulness, meditation. And like any good explorer, they started diving deeper, typing in what are chakras, how do you meditate, what is mindfulness. And before they knew it, their entire world had just grown tenfold. Over the next several months, they both went through their own training development period, working and developing each chakra, finding more about themselves, learning that there is something more to this world, and that something is trying to talk to them, that there's a higher power at work. God is here, and God is with all of us. After many months of good, hard, long hours, real deep self-reflection, practicing new tools, new ways of thinking, changing belief systems, taking action towards what they felt was in their heart. They found themselves at a point where they knew things had to change. They knew that they were ready for something new, for something different, but they couldn't quite understand what that was. So, that night, when they finally both went to bed, they both had fantastical dreams of a journey across distant lands, across deserts, oceans, grass, mountains. And when they woke that morning, they knew they needed to go on a spiritual quest. So then they wondered, what type of spiritual quest are we going on? They'd never been on a spiritual quest before. They didn't even know where to even begin. So they started planning. They started gathering days worth of food and water. They started grabbing bags. They started asking around in their local hometown, in the spiritual community. What are your opinions on the spiritual quest? Have you been on one before? What do you think of the idea? And before they knew it, they had received many different perspectives, many different doubts, many different individuals thinking, spiritual quest? Psh, don't waste your time with that rubbish. Come on, let's go hit this yoga class. It's only $20. Now, Joe didn't quite like the way that they were rubbing him. Something about it just seemed off. But Danny, on the other hand, he let their words fill his being. Soon enough, he started thinking a spiritual quest was foolish too. He started saying to Joe, Joe, why would we do such a foolish thing? We have nowhere to go. We don't even know what direction we would head in. We don't know anything about a spiritual quest. This is foolish. Let's listen to what these other guys are saying. Let's start learning yoga. Let's start learning all these different guided meditations. They say they have a membership program. Only $15 a month to join. Doesn't that sound like a steal? Joe looked at Danny and he said, Danny, something about that just does not feel right to me. It just rubs me the wrong way. And this spiritual quest, something is calling me. This seems important. And if you don't want to continue, that's okay. I'll see you on the other side, my brother. And so, Danny and Joe decide to split ways. Danny going deeper into his spiritual community, following the trends, following the ideology. Joe continuing to prepare, making himself an outfit that would keep him warm through the night, through the rain, and through the cold. He had enough food and water for 5 days. He still didn't know where to go, but something inside him told him not to worry about that. He put on his flip-flops, for he would be walking in flip-flops and barefoot the entire journey. And finally, the moment came where it was time to begin his spiritual quest. He locked his front door. He looked to the sky. And suddenly it came to him. The name of the spiritual quest would be finding the true self. He closed his eyes and took 3 deep inhalations and exhalations. He opened his eyes, and before him he seen a large gate with the words, Gate 1, Sensual Desire. Puzzled and intrigued by the sudden appearance of this gate, he walks towards it, pauses, takes one more look at his old home, smiles, and walks through the gate. As he walks through the gate, suddenly appears a very sturdy carriage with a man in very nice clothing, looking like royalty, and also looking very similar to himself inside the carriage. Sitting next to the driver's seat was a man who looked very intelligent and handsome, also looking very much like himself, holding a pen and paper. There were 5 horses attached to this carriage and an empty driver's seat. Suddenly, he realized the man inside the carriage was his soul. The man with the pen and paper was his subconscious. The carriage was his body. The horses were his 5 senses. And he was meant to hop into the driver's seat. Puzzled and confused, he seen the man inside the carriage point his finger off in the distance. And instinctively, he knew he was meant to head in that direction. Hopping into the driver's seat, he was on his way. As they passed through the first town, he could realize this town was so visually spectacular. It had many different beautiful people, many different beautiful sights, and many different shiny objects. It had many different types of stores that were just phenomenal. Looked like they had all types of riches inside of them. And as they were passing through this town, he noticed that the horse, one of his horses, could not resist continuously stopping to look at the people, to look at the shops, to look at the spectacular sights. It took Joe realizing that he had to focus his attention. He acknowledged that there were beautiful people, beautiful things all around him. But he chose to keep himself focused and to continue heading out of town, not looking left or right, but dead ahead, until they were able to exit the town. The next town they appeared in, this town had music unlike anything you would imagine. It had so many different sounds. Sounds of love, sounds of peace, sounds of partying, sounds of all different varieties. And once again, he noticed one of his horses being led astray by all the different sounds and noises around them. Once again, he realized he had to focus his attention. He had to block out all the noise. He had to remember why he was doing this. That there was something meant for him on this journey. And so, he grit his teeth, put on a big old smile, and he pushed forward, not paying any attention to any of the sounds around him. The third town had food that smelled so amazing. It made his mouth water. He could just imagine all the deliciousness that was all around him, all the drinks that were all around them. This village was so abundant in so many delicacies. He was drooling. But once again, he grit his teeth, he narrowed his eyes, he slightly flared his nostrils. He gave a big giant grin, and he pushed forward, not paying attention to any of the delicious smells all around him. Joe, now starting to understand, felt more confident in himself. For the next few days, he continued following the pointing of his soul in the carriage, coming across towns of amazing fragrance and towns of different textures. Joe continuing to follow his inner calling, focusing his mind, narrowing his eyes, slightly flaring his nostrils, gritting his teeth in a giant wide smile, feeling the fire of 1,000 suns burn inside of his very being. He pushed through it all until they reached the final town that had all senses, all fragrance, delicious food, different textures, beautiful visual sights, all coming at him at once. He knew this was the moment that he was going to surpass his limits. He felt his horses being tempted, but he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and he pushed through easily, not allowing even a single horse to stray. As he started to exit this final village, he seen a large gate lying at the end of the road. On this gate, it said, "Gate 2, Ill Will." As he passed through the gate, his horses stopped. The man holding the pen and paper smiled at Joe and gave him a hug. The finely dressed man inside the carriage stepped out, smiled at Joe, and gave him a hug. And before his very eyes, the horses, the carriage, and the two men dematerialized before his very eyes. Joe knew he was walking from this point on. As he looked out into the horizon, he seen a large river with fast-moving water. Joe, now realizing that his soul, always directing him, lives inside of him, and he just needs to look inwards to know where to go next. With his chest held high, Joe looks to his northeast, and he begins walking. As he's walking and starts to approach the river, it begins to rain heavily. This gets Joe in a very bad mood. He is so upset by the rain. He's like, "Oh, why is it raining so heavily? I wish I still had that carriage. I am soaking wet and my feet hurt." Joe, tired and upset, continues to walk until he reaches the river. Joe looks left and looks right and sees no bridge. Joe curses once again. "Oh, why is there no bridge? Who puts this large river right in the open like this? It's not like this is a natural occurring thing. Or maybe it is. I don't care either way. Why is this here? Now I have to cross it." Joe, angry and frustrated, starts crossing the river, hitting the water, kicking the water, screaming in anger. And finally, he gets across. Tired and exhausted, he takes a break. Joe thinks to himself, why is this becoming so frustrating? Why are things always getting harder? Why are you cursing me? Universe, why? What's going on? Joe, still in frustration, stands up and he continues to walk. As he walks, he finds that he has to climb over a very medium-sized mountain. Joe once again begins to curse. Why? Why is this big, large, enormous, impossible, frustrating mountain in front of me? Why do I have to go over this? This isn't fair. Joe angrily starts to climb up the mountain, falling many times, getting caught on many branches, tripping over many rocks, finally reaching the top after many, many, many hours. Joe, frustrated, screams at the world, "Why? Why are you doing this to me, heavens and earth? Why, universe, are you doing this to me?" Angrily, Joe continues to move on. This time he passes through a village. As he's walking through the village, he's tired, he's hungry, he's mad, he's upset. Every person he sees, he's just frowning at them. He's like, "What are they looking at? Why are they looking at me? What's so special about them?" And as he's passing through the village, he's seeing the villagers look more angry and more angry and more angry. And then they begin to toss rocks at Joe. Joe begins to run through the village, finally making it to the other side, only to see another large river waiting on the horizon. Joe once again, why? Screams to the heavens. Why are you doing this to me? Why? Tired and frustrated from the day of aggravation, Joe decides to set up camp for the night and rest. As Joe is resting by the campfire, a very handsome and seemingly very familiar looking stranger happens to walk by Joe. He says, "Well, hello there, stranger. How are you doing?" Joe, still tired from the day's adventures, he says, "I'm not good. I've had a day of crossing rivers, of hiking up mountains, of dealing with people who are just the rudest you would never imagine. I am just going through it right now." And the stranger says to Joe, Well, Joe, it seems like you have quite your hands full. Do you know that attitude can change everything? Having an attitude of gratitude makes even the hardest situations seem like a beautiful experience. And with those words, the stranger walks away. Joe, thinking about the words of the stranger, realizes how he's been behaving today, realizing that he's been tossing tantrum after tantrum, not taking a moment to look at the beauty around him, the opportunity that he has, not being grateful for the healthy body that God has given him, not realizing the amazing opportunity that he has been gifted. And it is that moment that Joe decides to change his attitude. As the sun begins to rise to start of a new day, Joe opens his eyes, excited, happy for the challenges to come and the growth he will experience. Joe packs up his campsite and he begins to head out. As Joe approaches the river, he looks at the water and he stops. He takes out his cup and he decides to drink a little bit of the water. And the water is the best tasting water he's ever had. It is so clear. It is so delicious. It feels like the water is healing his very spirits. Joe looks to the sky. He says, "Thank you, God. Thank you for allowing me to walk through this amazing river." As Joe begins to walk through the river, he feels himself step on something particularly odd-shaped. He reaches down into the water and pulls out a beautiful crystal. Stunned and amazed, Joe continues to walk until he reaches the other side, polishes the crystal, and is amazed by the beauty that was right underneath his feet the whole time. Joe looks to the sky again and says, "Thank you, God. Thank you for allowing me to see such a beautiful piece of your creation. Thank you for this hidden gem that was right beneath my feet the whole time." Joe then begins to continue his journey. As he's walking, he begins to come towards a very large mountain. Joe looks up to the mountain. Before starting to climb, he pauses. He says, "Thank you, God, for giving me such a healthy body to be able to climb this mountain, to have the strength, the courage, the endurance to persevere." He then begins to climb the mountain. As he starts to reach the top of the mountain, he looks out over the horizon, and it is the most spectacular sight that Joe has ever seen. To be so high up, you can really see the beauty of the world from such a new perspective. He takes his time to say, "Thank you, God. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to see your beautiful creation out from this perspective." He then begins to continue walking, and he starts to come across a village. This time, Joe has the biggest smile on his face. He's wishing everybody he sees a beautiful, loving, peaceful, and joyous day. And though the first couple people he see look angry and sad and miserable, as they see Joe, they can't help but smile back. And as Joe continues to walk through this village, more and more people begin to smile. Joe starts to feel the love returning to the village. Music starts to play. People start to talk with each other. It starts to become such a wonderful experience that as before Joe leaves the village, he stops. He looks to the sky. He says, "Thank you, God. Thank you for the beautiful people that are here all around me. Thank you for all my brothers and sisters for us to share this moment together." And as Joe was about to leave the village, a small little boy and girl come up to Joe holding flowers. They both give Joe a bouquet of roses and say, "Good luck on your journey." As Joe continues to walk, it begins to rain. It begins to hail. It begins to snow. And Joe grits his teeth in a gigantic smile, looks to the sky, and says, "Thank you, God. Thank you for blessing me with this opportunity to become stronger. Thank you for this beautiful rain that nourishes the land. Thank you for the purity of the snow that covers it in such a fine white. Thank you for the hail that is toughening my body." And before Joe knew it, the clouds dissipated and the sun shone brightly. Before Joe stood the third gate, which said, "Third gate, sloth and torpor." As Joe began to walk through the gate, there was a door. Joe twists the knob on the door, opens it, and steps through. Joe then finds himself in a very familiar location, a space that looks just like his house. Joe, feeling homesick, missing his beautiful home from the weeks of travel, starts to feel nostalgia. As Joe looks around, he notices on the opposite side of the wall that there is a door with a sign that says, "Fourth gate, restlessness." Joe begins to head towards the door when suddenly, to his right, he hears a TV playing his favorite TV show. Joe pauses, turns his head, and there he sees what looks like his living room, playing his favorite TV show, his nice beloved soft couch, waiting for him to sit down. On the table, he sees the most delicious snacks, all his favorites, waiting for him. Next to it, he sees a number of different substances, particularly Joe's favorite, some good marijuana. Joe can't help himself. Joe decides, "I'll only sit down for a few minutes just to rest." When will I get another chance to be here? Joe goes over to his couch. He sits down. As he starts to stretch his legs, he pops up the recliner. He starts to lean back. He grabs his favorite snacks. He's getting engrossed in his favorite TV show. And before he knows it, hours have flown by. And he says to himself, I might only spend one night here. Joe decides to pick up that nice, freshly wrapped marijuana joint and begins puffing away. Before Joe knows it, hours turn into days, days turn into weeks. Joe has grown large inside. His favorite TV programs playing in all different varieties, from his favorite dramas to his favorite comedies to his favorite action shows, seeming to never end, seeming to never have any repeating episodes, only brand new episodes every single time. It's like a One Piece season, just thousands of episodes of all of his favorites. Joe indulging in that delicious marijuana. As these weeks go by, Joe finally starts to snap out of it a little bit. He starts to look around. He's like, how long have I been here? How long have I been sitting on this couch? Kicked up, leaned back, resting. Look at my body, soft and spongy. My mind feels numb, feels weak. All that THC in my system. My world seems so hazy. Joe remembered for just a moment what he was doing. He realizes, I'm in the middle of a spiritual quest. How did I get here? Joe takes a deep breath. He says, no more. Joe looks around and he sees that he's in a cage. He sees the door to the fourth gate just outside of his cage. He has no idea how he's going to get out. And he's still feeling tempted to go back to looking at TV and eating more of his favorite snacks and smoking more weed. The temptation is so tantalizing. But Joe stays strong. Joe tosses all his snacks on the ground. He tosses all his marijuana through the gates of his prison walls. Joe turns off the TV in his mind, but it continues to play. Joe has no choice but to close his eyes and to start meditating. He breathes in and out, staying focused, fasting himself for what seems like weeks. Finally, after an unknown period of time, he opens his eyes. He feels like himself again. The TV has been silent for quite some time. He looks to his left and he sees the key to the prison cell right there. right next to him this whole time. Joe grabs the key. He opens the lock. He walks through. He heads to the door that says the fourth gate. Restlessness. He twists the handle and he steps through. Joe now found himself in the middle of a jungle with trees large and tall, the sun bright in the sky. As Joe began to walk through the jungle, he began to see monkeys jumping from tree limb to tree limb. These monkeys began to screech louder and louder. And what Joe began to notice is that these monkeys were screeching thoughts of regrets that he had of himself of the past. Things that he just couldn't quite let go of all the way. Was he good enough for his family, for his friends? Was he enough in this world? Did he treat the people he loved with love and kindness? Did he do his best each and every day? All types of thoughts running through the monkey screeches. Joe began to run faster and faster. And as he ran, he began to see more monkeys. Now, not only screeching of thoughts and regrets of the past, but questions that he had of the future. What would he be? What could he do? What was Joe's purpose in this life? Continuously, these monkeys would screech, confusing Joe and filling Joe with anguish. Then it finally clicked inside of Joe. He stopped. He took a deep breath. He began to do Qigong movements. He began to use the training he had worked on for so many months to start to calm his mind. He started to harmonize his body, following the Shaolin practices he learned. Continuously moving, making his moves sharper and sharper. And soon the outside world was silent. Joe then saw the monkeys before him, silent, starting to copy his movements. Everybody, every animal, starting to find a certain type of harmonious connection with each other. Joe then realized the power of the present moment, of calming himself, of settling his mind, the different tools that he has acquired over the years of training. Before Joe knew it, he saw a large gate open before him. The gate said, Gate 5, Skeptical Doubt. Joe smiled. He headed towards the gate and he walked through. Once on the other side of the gate, Joe found himself in the middle of a long road. On both sides of the road were people that he's only heard of, that he's met in passing, that he considered acquaintances, that he considered friends, family, that he really loved and cherished. On the far side of the road, Joe could see a sign that said, The End, and something covered up by a sheet that he just quite couldn't make out. Joe knew he was going to have to make it to the end of the road if he was to find out what was underneath the sheet. So he began to walk, and as he began to walk, all the people on both sides of the road started whispering, saying, shouting, "Joe, you think you're good enough to do this? You think that you have dreams? Only fools have dreams. It's all about the money. Joe, you were never enough when you were a kid. You think you're enough now? Joe, we never loved you. We only loved what you could do for us. Joe, you think you're strong enough? You think you can live your dreams? You think you can go against the wave, the current? Joe, who do you think you are? Joe, what makes you so special? Joe, look at your freaking ego, so large. You don't know your freaking place. All different forms of doubt coming at Joe continuously. Joe tried his best to keep his mind clear and to walk straight. He did good at first with the individuals that he only just heard of, with the individuals that he met in passing, with the individuals that he considered acquaintances. But as he got closer to the end, he started hearing the voices of the individuals he considered his friends and family. He felt his knees start to buckle. He felt the weight of self-doubt begin to creep into his being. Right when he was starting to make it just 50 feet from the end, Joe fell to his knees. Joe felt that he couldn't take it anymore. He felt the soul-sucking, crushing feeling of unworthiness starting to engulf him more and more. His world became heavy. Joe closed his eyes, and inside of him, he could start to hear something. He heard, "Don't give up, Joe. Great men will be tested. Great men go deep inside themselves and break free from chains. The chains of fear, of self-doubt, of guilt. Joe, I see the heart of a great man." Joe begins to breathe deeply, deeper than he thought he could. And suddenly he finds himself floating in the void, darkness all around. As he starts to look closer and closer all around him, he sees something shiny, something bright, something illuminating far in the distance of the void. He starts to gently float towards this light. As he gets closer and closer and closer, he starts to make out the shape. He starts to make out the individual. He recognizes that it's him, a version of him that he's never seen before. A version of him that is so illuminating, that is so full of light, that it forces the darkness to repel. As Joe floats in front of him, his light self, the light Joe puts his hand on his chest, and like a bolt of lightning, Joe finds himself back near the end of the road. Except something's different. He can feel his spirit filled with new vigor. He can feel his very presence now different in some type of way. He stands to his feet. He begins to walk. This time, the voices of the ones he loves seems so quiet. Something in Joe is now different. He knows that there is nothing that is going to stop him. As Joe finally makes it to the end of the road, he looks up at the banner that says, "The End." He crosses the line, and all is quiet. Joe lifts up the sheet, and underneath he sees a mirror. A large mirror showing what Joe looks like now. Joe now realizing that light in the void, that version of him that he's seen, is the version of him now. That there is something new about him. That newness being a knowing. That he has the strength to dispel any darkness. That all of what anybody tries to tell him, that if he's not good enough, or that he has to be a certain type of way, he knows all of that to be lies and illusions. He now knows that he is a divine being, that he is capable of doing anything, that God has been with him every step of the way, that God lives inside of him, that together he is going to do the most amazing things with God for all of humanity. That he is going to help co-create heaven on earth. As Joe turns around with an instant knowing, with full trust, he starts to walk. And as he walks back down the road, he hears claps, he hears applause, he hears cheers. All of those individuals that were once doubting Joe are now shouting, "Hooray! Joe, I knew you could do it. Joe, you did amazing things. Joe, you blew my mind away and gave me hope." Joe makes it to the end of the road, waiting for his ride, because he just knows that someone's coming to pick him up. And just like that, a very nice, polite gentleman in a hoodie shows up in just a regular 4-door car. The man's face can't be seen, hidden in shadow, but Joe hops in. After some time, the man drops Joe off in front of his house, and Joe is slightly puzzled. After being gone for so long, Joe thought things might look a little different. He thanks the gentleman, hops out, and walks towards his door. Taking a deep, fresh breath, with new vigor, with a new spirit, with a new perspective of his life, of who he is. Joe's mind is still spinning. Joe opens the door, walks through, and he notices that his house is still just as clean as he left it. He goes and checks the calendar, and he sees that it has only been one day since the time he left. Joe cannot believe what he's seeing. How is this possible? Joe walks back outside, walks to the curb, puts his head in his hands, mind completely blown. What is going on? Joe says to himself, I've been gone for so long. How has it only been one day? Have I been crazy this whole time? Was any of this real? Did any of this mean anything? As Joe is going through mental gymnastics in his head, the kind stranger that had dropped off Joe pulls back up. He says, Hey Joe, you forgot this. He tosses Joe his backpack and says to Joe, Hey, don't forget to drink water. Jumping timelines can be quite dehydrating. Hearing the man say this, Joe's eyes grew wide. Joe looks at the man and says, Who are you? The man's face, still covered in shadows, gives Joe a thumbs up, and he drives off. Joe, still very much confused, knows that something inside of him has changed, that he's not the same individual that he was when he first started the journey. Joe feels as though his eyes have been blasted open. He knows that there is nothing that can stop him. He knows that he is a divine being, co-creating with God, to co-create heaven on earth, to make this planet beautiful for everyone. Joe begins to weep, uncontrollable tears of happiness. For now he feels that the sun has come out in his world in such a new, brighter type of way. The next day, Joe calls his friend, Danny. He says, Danny, you will not believe what has happened to me. Danny says, Did you end up going on that spiritual quest? It seemed like you made it very far. Joe, a little puzzled by Danny's response, says, Danny, I don't know how to explain this to you, but I was gone for weeks, for months. I was gone so long. But yet it's only been one day. On this journey, I realized we, all of us, we can co-create with God to make heaven on earth, to make this world beautiful for everybody. I feel that this is my job now, This is my mission, my purpose. This is what I'm here to do. Danny, let's work together. Let's do our best to make this world beautiful for everybody. Danny's response to Joe. Joe, I'm not sure what you've been doing, but you sound crazy. You sound ridiculous. Who do you think you are, saying that you can help co-create with God, heaven on earth? Joe, the others were right about you. You're just some type of foolish dreamer who's never going to amount to anything. I wish you the best, Joe. Beep. Joe, mouth dropped open, feels the pain in his heart, knowing that this is the end of his relationship with his friend Danny. But he is still so filled with joy for knowing no matter what anybody says, no matter who tries to stand against him, no matter how many people try to stand in his way, Joe will never give up, for he is awakened. He knows he's a divine being, that God is with us every step of the way, and that we are going to create heaven on earth. We are going to make this world beautiful for everybody. And Joe begins to weep once again, tears of happiness, ready for the next journey to begin. The end. Well, this is going to conclude our story for today in our training session. Thank you everybody for sticking around until the end. I hope everybody was able to get an understanding of what are the 5 hindrances. A quick recap. Hindrance 1, sensual desire. 2, ill will. 3, sloth and torpor. 4, restlessness. 5, skeptical doubt. These 5 hindrances all involve different states of the mind, though some do affect the body. Everything starts in our mind first, and it is learning to control our mind, to start to master ourselves, that it leads us to whole different fields of understanding. For there is nothing that we cannot do. For if you didn't realize from this story, you're a divine being. I'm a divine being. All of us are a divine being. And we are all capable of co-creating a beautiful world with God for everybody. And so, we ended there. Go ahead, head to the Stand store, type in White Wolf 719. There you can get yourself a free Warriors Light leveling guide. This leveling guide is going to help you get from level 1 to level 2 to level 3. Level 3, you realize you're a divine being. You're working with God. You're walking your purpose. You got this. And yeah, know that God is always with you. And when you're finally ready to take different steps, go into different directions, when you're ready to start finding out more about yourself, God will lead you through different teachers, through different individuals, different scenarios, different circumstances. God will prepare you. So trust in God. know God is always with you, and believe in yourself. And until the next exciting training session of the Soul Society, love and light leads the way. Have a beautiful day.